All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back. We're here with some MMA DFS picks for DraftKings and FanDuel UFC 279. Best bets, picks, lineup advice, you name it. Saturday, September 10th, live Q&A. We had to push it back some because of everything that went on yesterday. If you missed it, don't worry. We'll be sure to talk about every single thing that happened. Welcome. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy. I am joined by Jake the Snake, owner of MMADFS.com. Jake, we have hectic jobs, you and I. And when we talk on Friday nights, we're usually pretty drained as it's normally a chaotic week. But nothing compares to what happened yesterday. How are you feeling?
Tired.
That's one way to look at it. So, everyone, welcome. Again, this is a live Q&A. We'll be here till 4:30 p.m. Eastern. If you have questions throughout the show, go ahead and drop it in the chat. We'll answer them as we go along. What we normally do is for pay-per-view cards with multi 5-round fights, we talk about what that means for lineup strategy and GPP strategy. We break down the main events. We give you any newcomers that are on the card, what their backgrounds are, and what their expectations are in the UFC. Fighters that have less than 3 fights under their belt. We'll talk about some context to their stats, a fight you have to target in DFS, some prize picks plays, and we'll close it out with our stream parlay. And again, interrupt us. If you have any questions, we will get to them. Throw questions in the chat. It is 30 minutes long. And we're probably going to talk for a vast majority of that 30 minutes about what happened yesterday and how it impacts the slate, because it is pretty unprecedented. So on FanDuel, they changed the salaries. I'm shocked as you are that they changed the salaries. And everything is pretty okay. Jake, just everything is pretty okay over there, right? No gross mispricings anymore?
Yeah, nah, it's pretty straightforward on FanDuel, normal slate.
Okay, cool. So DraftKings, meanwhile, what you see on screen here, I have it up. If you are familiar with what happened yesterday, you'll know you'll know what this is. If you're not, basically every single person missed weight, chaos ensued. They rearranged fights. Now we have 3 different matchups on the card. Chimaev, who is initially expected to fight Nate Diaz, he is now fighting Kevin Holland, who was expected to fight. Who was he expected to fight, Jake? D-Rod.
D-Rod.
D-Rod, who is now fighting Li Jingliang, who is expected to fight Tony Ferguson, who is now fighting Nate Diaz. So all this happened. Salaries didn't change, Jake, which means, as I tweeted out yesterday, we have Chimaev is still a big favorite, but now he's a 5-rounder, 9,600. We have Jingliang, who is a slight underdog at 9K. We have Kevin Holland, who is a plus 400 underdog at 8,700. And we have Daniel Rodriguez as a minus 150 favor or so, whatever it is now, as a $7,500 underdog. And we have the main event, a 5-round fight between a $7,200 Tony Ferguson and a $6,600 Nate Diaz. We already got a bunch of questions in the chat. We got Jordan, Mr. Grapefruit, Tencent, Chris, Jonathan. What's up? All right. Before we get to that, Jake, let's discuss it, man. Let's talk about it. What does this mean for DraftKings? I guess what was your first thoughts when you saw this? And then as we've had the last 16 hours to digest it, I feel like we've gotten a pretty good grasp on what the field is going to do, what the field has done in one particular situation, what generally is optimal. Talk to me.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was, this is stupid. Like, just change the pricing. Like, we have 25% of the slate almost that just, all their pricing's wrong. Well, I guess Chimaev, his price is still pretty much right. But we've got 5 guys out of 26 fighters on the slate. Pricing's completely off. So my first thought is, it's really hard, if not nearly impossible, for the Ferguson Diaz fight to be left out of winning lineups. The most expensive guy is 7,200. We were looking at dogs earlier that have won over the last year, and of all the dogs that are that cheap, they've all made the winning lineup. So
in 5-round
really
fights,
hard
right?
to see the win in 5-round fights. So it's really hard to see the winner getting left out at that cheap price tag. All of the 5-round dogs that have scored over 95 points have, regardless of price, have ended up in the winning DraftKings lineup. It's just really hard at that price. I mean, you would have to have a crazy high-scoring slate with a ton of underdogs winning and completely water everything down and have that fight be, far lower scoring than expected. So first thought is, you're going to have this fight that everyone's playing. I mean, the projected ownership, the combined ownership is like 95% or something. So it's not like the field isn't aware of this. And, that's probably about the chances that it ends up in the winning lineup, if not higher. I mean, the way it doesn't, I would say, is like a no contest, like an eye poke or something. Like that's it's one of the few ways, because this isn't the type of fight like an Esparza fight where we're going to see like no volume. I mean, these guys are going to fight. Like, they both have bad striking defenses. They're both old. Like, they're both, trying to have their swan song here and just do something at the end of their careers. I don't think we're going to see a staring contest, which would be really the only way that at their prices it would fail, is a no contest or a staring contest. And I don't really see either one of those happening. So my first thought is, well, this is stupid, because now everyone is going to play one of these fighters. One of these fighters is going to end up in the winner. It's going to be, 20% higher owned than your typical main event. And normally we have some leverage. Your average main event is 74% combined ownership. It ends up in the winning lineup of about 64% of the time. So there's some leverage on being under in the main event typically. Now that leverage is gone, because this is going to be 95% owned, and it's going to end up in the winning lineup 95 to 100% of the time. So we're basically in a 5-spot play here now in tournaments, because the winner of that is going to take one of the 6 spots. But then we're trying to create unique lineups with 5 spots in the lineup instead of 6. So it's dramatically harder to get unique. And then you factor in, we got Chimaev, who is everyone's going to play. He's going to be like 65% owned. He's going to absolutely smash unless he gets knocked out by Holland, which is unlikely. So then you're going to have 10 to 14,000 lineups that start with the winner of the main event and Chimaev. And we're trying to create a unique lineup with 4 spots against 14,000 other entries. And then you have D-Rod that's 7,500. And if he wins, he's going to score 80, 85 points in his floor, if not more. That just makes it more complicated. I mean, and we have Almeida out there, that's going to be like 50% owned and has a 65% chance to get a finish inside the distance, like a 40% chance for round 1. So any lineup that starts with like Ferguson, Chimaev, D-Rod, Almeida, like, get ready for like a 500-way split. I mean, I would say that for tournaments. And I'll let you talk for a minute, man. I need to catch a breath.
Dude, it's a lot. And I think you hit all the key points, right? Like, that's the context of the slate that we're playing. And now we have to think about, how do we get different, right? Low risk seems very easy. If you can't find the low risk lineup based on what we just said, you should probably quit UFC low risk contest, right? That it's very clear on what you should be doing there. The question becomes then, beyond low risk, are we stacking that main event? Because we've talked at end every single show. We get the question pretty frequently, do you stack this main event in tournaments? The answer is pretty much always no, right? However, Jake, now we have a 7,200 plus a 6,600, and we have back-to-back questions in the chat about, should we stack the main event for GPPs? And I don't think it's that bad of an idea. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on how that would be optimal, and if so, how do we make that work for our lineups?
Yeah, I mean, me and you were actually talking about it a little bit, that this might be the one time where you actually could stack it in high-risk contests, because they're so cheap. And potentially, there's a good chance it's going to go 5 rounds. You look at the odds, like, it's basically a coin flip as to whether or not we see a finish or go the distance. But at the very least, it's probably going to be a long fight, which means they're both going to have solid floors. And at their cheap price tags, I mean, if the loser scores like 65, 70 points, it's a decent chance that the loser could still end up in winning tournament lineups if we see a slate where only a few underdogs win. Or if, we have some underdogs like Elise Reed that, I mean, she could get outscored by, Nate Diaz scored 70 points in a loss. He could outscore Elise Reed in a win, potentially. And then you factor in the cheaper price tag, you might be able to get some combinations where even if Nate Diaz isn't a top 3 underdog scorer, but he's close enough, you might be able to get a combination where it still ends up being the optimal combination. So, yeah, this is the one time ever where I'm going to say it's actually okay to stack the main event in high-risk contests. And you also have to factor in the ownership. We're trying to avoid dupes here. And we were looking at that RDA slate, and I think we were saying like 1% of people stacked that when it was RDA, Moicano, and RDA was like 7,300. Like, almost no one was stacking it. So, I mean, it is a good way to get unique, and it does have the chance to actually end up in tournament lineups, like, far greater than normal. I mean, normally the recipe for a 5-round fight to end up in 5-round stack to end up in the winning lineup is it goes the distance, super high volume decision, the favorite wins, and the loser scores like 70. So, I mean, we could definitely see that here. And now we have the salary savings that it would allow you to play, Almeida and Chimaev and create a super lineup if we do see a 5-round decision between Ferguson and Diaz.
True or false? I would rather stack that fight in a GPP than fade it completely.
Did I literally in my notes have stack greater than fade?
You can tell we've been doing these shows long enough. We're thinking on the same page. So there you go. There's the answer to that question. All right, let's see. We got Blender in the chat says, I can't wait to make a ton of uniques and then have a 700-way tie for first with 4 mispriced 40 to 60% fighters in them. Yeah. I mean, that's the most likely outcome, right, Jake? Like, if for this slate, we talked about, do we have the patience and the restraint to withdraw our entries? No, we don't. Of course not. But that's probably the most likely outcome, right?
Yeah. I mean, it definitely is. When you have mispriced fighters, more likely than not, they're going to succeed. You know, they're favorites for a reason, and they're mispriced, you know, for a stupid reason. Like, they're not mispriced because they're bad plays. They're mispriced because the pricing's messed up. Like, they're still probably going to score well. D-Rod always scores well when he wins. The fact that he's 7,500 doesn't mean he's going to score worse. I mean, he could get knocked out, but like if he doesn't, he's probably going to outland his way to a decision, has a high floor, has a high ceiling. I mean, the guy is a machine in DFS. So yeah, I mean, it's a scary fade when the guy's 7,500 and going to be like 40, 50% owned. Yeah, I mean, expect to lose on slates like this if you're playing to win.
That's a very key point. It's a great way to phrase it. Now, look on the flip sides of these misprices, right? We have Li Jingliang, who is 9K, and he is a plus whatever. Was he plus 130 now or so? Whatever it is, right? And you have Kevin Holland at 8,700, plus 400 or so, give or take a few cents here and there. What are your thoughts on them, right? Big underdogs, completely mispriced in the wrong way. What do you think the ownership is going to be on these guys in the big GPP? And what do we think about playing them? Because not only do they have to surpass the expectations of actually winning this fight, these dudes have to outscore Chimaev and Almeida, especially in Jing Liang's sense, and even Collier and Dawodu in some of these other great matchups, and Kutalaba even, right, who has a high ceiling. So thoughts on ownership and even the risk reward of playing those guys in tournaments?
Yeah, I mean, so they're both projected to be right around 10% owned, and they are kind of the ultimate leverage play, you know, because they're going against, Chimaev and D-Rod. So, I mean, yeah, like, it's a great leverage play, but like you said, it's not like just because they win, they're going to be in the winning lineup. I mean, these guys could win and still get priced out of the winning lineup because they're massively overpriced, and they're also both one-dimensional strikers, which makes it a lot harder to score well, especially for Holland. He's going against Chimaev. I mean, if he gets taken down and controlled for the whole first round, lands a knockout early in round 2, like, cool, Chimaev's not in the winner, but neither is Holland.
Right. Exactly. That's a great way to put it. Okay. Just really quickly, right, for those who are playing the GPP and thinking, okay, I'm going to play Diaz or Ferguson, but I'm not going to stack it, right? I'm going to take a stance and pick one side. Quick breakdown on what you think that fight ends up looking like and your thoughts on the money lines there with Ferguson being the favorite.
Yeah, man, what a tricky thing to break down. I mean, so this was announced a little bit after 6:00 yesterday, and immediately I'm like, all right, time to break down a new fight. Just throw away everything I've been working on all week. Start over here at 6:00 when we normally be finishing up.
Right.
So I mean, yeah, I didn't have as much time to break it down, but obviously we know both guys pretty well. Diaz had been preparing for a wrestling match. He had been preparing for a 5-round fight. Ferguson hasn't landed a takedown in like 11 fights, even though he's a good grappler. He just doesn't go for takedowns. I mean, he's looking for a striking bet. The interesting thing here is Tony Ferguson. So first of all, he was in a 3-round fight. Now it's 5 rounds. Everyone's like, oh, Tony Ferguson always prepares for 20 rounds. It doesn't matter. But let's be real. I mean, 24 hours notice going from 3 to 5 does matter. And on top of that, Tony Ferguson at 155 pounds is deceased. I mean, this is now 170-pound Tony Ferguson. The other guy died against Michael Chandler in the octagon in his last fight. So, I mean, we don't know how Ferguson's going to look. He just got absolutely murdered in his last outing. I mean, the whole world watched his soul leave his body as his crumpled carcass lay on the octagon floor. Poetic. And now he's moving up 15 pounds to take on Nate Diaz. I mean, the last person to move up a weight class and take on Nate Diaz was Conor McGregor, and he got submitted in the second round. I mean, so Nate Diaz, he has a slight height advantage. He's only an inch taller, but I think the fact that Ferguson is moving up is somewhat of a red flag for Ferguson. And then you have the age. I mean, Ferguson's 38, Diaz is 37. They're both old and washed up, but I would say Ferguson is definitely in a more rapid decline than Diaz. I mean, we just see him get beat up. Like, Diaz hasn't been very active, but he also hasn't been taking that much damage. So I think all the red flags are on Ferguson's side of things. But everyone's like, oh, Diaz can't win. He said he stopped training for Chimaev. Like, yeah, but I mean, Ferguson, man, I think it's a high variance spot. I think it could go either way. So I think you have to look at it from a game theory perspective. Diaz is going to have half the ownership. I mean, I think it's going to be close to a coin flip. I think it's going to be a high volume decision. Could probably go either way. I don't really think either guy is going to finish the other. I mean, neither one of these has landed. I mean, I think I was looking at it earlier. Ferguson's on a 4-fight losing streak. His last win was in 2019. Diaz has lost 3 of his last 4. But he's super durable. He's only been finished once since 2013. That was a doctor stoppage against Masvidal, which is probably the best way Ferguson would get a finish, would be like slice him up with an elbow, force a doctor stoppage, probably in the middle rounds, which is totally possible. I don't really think Diaz is going to finish Ferguson unless Ferguson's chin is just absolutely gone. Diaz isn't a big knockout guy. His last KO was in 2013. I mean, he's really, he's always been more of a kind of a submission guy, but also like just kind of a brawler, but he just doesn't land that many knockouts. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's close to a coin flip, but I'm actually taking Diaz's side. Seems like the whole world's on Ferguson here. I think that dude's done.
We see we got some Ferguson fans in the chat who are obviously always very quick to let people know about their undying love for Ferguson. So yeah, I mean, honestly, UFC fans deserve this. And I don't even mean that positively or negatively. I just mean they deserve it, right? Diaz versus Ferguson. This is what fans deserve, and they should have just made this from the get-go. But regardless, right? We have all this said. I think we've broken down the mispricings enough, the strategy enough. Hopefully, people have an idea. All right, let's move on to newcomers. In the rare case that anyone else actually ends up in the optimal lineup, we should probably talk about some of these other fighters. And we have a couple fighters making their debut. Jake, right? We have Melissa Martinez, Super Melly. Who should not be undefeated, but is somehow undefeated. She's making her debut against Elise Reed. What kind of fighter is Martinez? What can we expect from her in this matchup where she is priced as the favorite?
Yeah, so she's a Mexican kickboxer, only 25 years old. She hasn't fought since December 2019, which is kind of crazy. Like, what has she been doing? But she apparently went back to school. She's been doing kickboxing, just competing in a bunch of kickboxing tournaments, which you look at her last fight and she really struggled with getting controlled. She doesn't have much grappling. And instead of like, oh, I'm going to work on my wrestling and become a more well-rounded MMA fighter, she's like, yeah, I'm just going to go back to kickboxing so people don't grapple with me. So, I mean, that's kind of a red flag, but now she's facing a one-dimensional striker. So probably not going to be an issue now, but something to keep in mind in the future. And yeah, like you alluded to, you watch her last fight. It's like, how did she win that fight? So, I mean, I think she should be 6-1, but she's 7-0, so still undefeated, decent striker, no grappling, pretty young, hasn't fought in a while.
Cool. Yeah, I can't wait to target her in her second fight if they give her a grappler. Please, one time, give us that matchup. Okay. So moving on down, I think we only have one other fighter making their debut, and it is your prototypical, and I'm using your words that you said to me, your prototypical 39-year-old 1-0 UFC debut in Danielle Wolfe. Talk to me about her, what we can expect from this matchup. And like you said yesterday to me, she looked absolutely massive in the face-offs. But whether or not that plays a part, who knows? Give me your take.
Yeah, she looked huge next to Norma Dumont yesterday at face-offs. Pretty crazy. So she's 39 years old, also hasn't fought in a couple years. Her only fight was on Contender Series. Easily could have lost that fight. She got outstruck, ended up winning it. Pretty close fight, but she's like a former Golden Gloves boxer. She had Olympic aspirations. Apparently her weight class wasn't part of the Olympics, so she didn't get to go, which, I mean, you look at her like, oh, they didn't have like a 6-foot, 145-pound women's weight class. Weird. But with one fight under her belt, we really don't know that much about her. I mean, presumably she can't grapple. She did go for a guillotine on the Contender Series, but I mean, basically she's just a boxer, but decent boxer, super tall, jacked. I would say she's a wild card. We've seen Dumont get knocked out by Megan Anderson, another super tall striker. So, I mean, who's to say that Danielle Wolfe can't do it too? But at the same time, she could get completely overwhelmed in grappling and clinch situations because she's just a boxer. So I would call her a wild card.
I think that's very fair. Very fair. Okay, so that highlights the newcomers. Okay, let's talk about good fighter, good matchup, bad matchup. These are fighters that have less than 4 fights under their belt. If you're using stats of any kind, there can be some small sample issues there. So we just like to look at some more context to these situations. So Jake, we're starting from the highest price to lowest price. What about Jailton Almeida? He is averaging 116 points in his 2 wins, absolutely dominant. Good fighter, bad fighter. Good matchup, bad matchup.
Yeah, he's a good fighter, man. Super explosive. We still don't know about his stand-up game or his cardio because he finishes everyone in the first round. But I mean, guy's an absolute animal.
Cool. Okay. Moving on down, we have now we're just scrolling. Who else we got here?
Before we go on real quick, I just realized we didn't talk about Anton. He's actually in
Oh
that
yeah,
matchup, and he's a newcomer.
the Pleasure Man. Talk to me about him.
It's a pleasure, man. So yeah, just real quick on Anton. 26-year-old, 8-0, trains with Chimaev and Gustafsson in All Stars in Sweden. Really poor striking defense, but put on like a really dominant wrestling performance on the Contender Series to get his shot in UFC. And it was really funny on that Contender Series. Like Felder and everyone was like, "Oh yeah, this guy's definitely not getting a contract from this performance." And then gets a contract, but terrible matchup for him. But he's a guy that we might want to target in his second fight. But he's all offense. I think he's bad striking defense, bad wrestling defense. So I think it's still a good matchup for Almeida, even though Anton is a bit of a wrestler himself.
Bad striking defense, bad grappling defense. What more could you ask for from a defensive perspective? All right. So moving on down, we got Johan Janson, who we talked about when he made his debut against Gabe Green back in April. Very explosive fighter. But do you think he's good or bad? And that can be answered DFS or just fighting wise. And then what about this matchup with Darian Weeks?
So I think Johan is good for DFS, but I think he's a bad fighter in general. He's got terrible cardio. He's just an explosive brawler, basically. He'll look for takedowns and guillotines too, but he's all offense, no defense, no cardio. So he's good for DFS, bad in real life. We don't know about Weeks yet, man. I would call it a bad matchup just because Weeks has never been finished. But, Weeks is 0-2 in the UFC, hasn't really faced any, like, super powerful strikers. I mean, Ian Gary, maybe. Ian Gary kind of danced around the outside that whole fight. It was a low-volume, boring fight. Didn't really push the pace. Johan is going to push the pace. He's going to try to finish Weeks early. So Weeks is kind of a mystery. I mean, we don't know how he'll do in, like, a brawl against a dangerous guy. We saw him fight Brian Barberena, who's not that dangerous in terms of actual finishing ability. So I don't know. I guess I would still call it a bad matchup for Johan, but I think it could be one of those matchups where he knocks him out and you're like, oh, well, maybe Weeks was never that good.
For sure. That's definitely possible. What about, okay, we got a bunch of higher priced dogs here. Dennis Tululian, just one fight under his belt against a very tough opponent in his debut.
Yeah, I mean, he showed that he's another guy that's all offense, just boxing. No real defense, no real cardio. I mean, I would call him a bad fighter. He looks like a round one KO or bust type guy. Going against Jamie Pickett, who has historically been durable, but has been finished in the first round in his last two losses. So I'd say it's probably a bad matchup, but it's another one where it's like, oh, he could knock him out early, and we're like, well, Pickett was never that good. I would say that's kind of similar to the Johan, where it's like these guys are early KO or bust fighters in matchups that seem like they're against durable guys, but we also wouldn't be shocked to see them get a finish.
Fair enough. And what about Chad and Helliger here, who won his debut against Jesse Schroeder back in February?
Yeah, I wasn't that impressed by his debut. Afterwards, he was like, oh, I had a terrible training camp. Like, I'm normally going to be better, but the guy's 35 years old. That was going to be a split decision with like Jesse Strader, who was terrible. So yeah, I mean, the big deal with Chad is he's like a one-dimensional striker and he gets taken down a ton, and now he's going against a wrestler. So it's definitely a bad matchup. And I mean, the guy's on a long winning streak, but I'm not really ready to call him a good fighter. I think he's just sort of an average fighter in a bad matchup.
Fair enough. Elise Reed, who does have 3 fights under her belt and has been knocked out in both of her losses.
Yeah, I mean, she's fighting for a job here at 1-2. I mean, she's probably getting cut with another loss. She got mauled on the mat by Sam Hughes and finished in the 3rd round of the doppelganger fight in her last outing. I would say this is probably the best matchup she's had because she keeps facing grapplers and she's a one-dimensional Taekwondo striker, and now she's facing a kickboxer. So I think this is the UFC being like, okay, you're a pure striker. We won't force you to grapple, but you got to prove you're actually a decent striker. So this is kind of a prove-it spot for Reed. It's a good matchup because she won't have to grapple, but I still think she's a bad fighter.
Fair enough. And then we got Chris Barnett. He does have 3 fights under his belt. Probably also a lose and get cut spot for him too.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, 1-2. The guy missed weight at heavyweight. He officially weighed in, I believe, is the heaviest heavyweight of all time. Not really what you want going into a contract make or break spot. The guy's just so short at 5'9" at heavyweight. It's just so hard for him to do anything but throw kicks. I mean, he's just massively outsized. in height and reach by his opponents. I mean, the guy's a bowling ball, but I don't know. I mean, he's a fun fighter, but he's not a good fighter. And Collier is just kind of a high volume decision guy who apparently wants to grapple more now because he started actually shooting for takedowns in his last two fights, which doesn't necessarily bode well for Barnett. So I would say bad fighter and a bad matchup, but it's not the most imposing matchup of all time. I mean, it's Jake Collier, former, 185er.
For sure. All right, that wraps it up. We have 5 minutes left in the show, so we'll rapid fire these last couple sections. Really quickly, Jake, we actually got a few people asking about Macy at 7,400 against Aldana. I know Macy put up a big score last time. Shout out to her. She helped me win $200K, so she is a great fighter, in my opinion. But thoughts on this matchup, just really quickly, just because we got a couple questions. Thoughts on if she can make the optimal.
Yeah, man, that's a really tough matchup for Macy. I know Holly Holm took Aldana down a bunch, but other than that, I think Aldana's been taken down like 7 times on 45 attempts in her 10 UFC fights. She actually does have a really good takedown defense, 84%, and that's with Holly Holm landing a bunch of takedowns. So this is a really tough matchup for Chiasson. I think it's kind of Macy chasing here because I think Aldana is going to be able to stay on her feet and stay off the fence. She's tough to control. And in her last fight, she took on Kunitskaya, who that's all she does is control people. And Aldana knocked her out in the first round and didn't let her control her.
True. I remember that one very well. Okay. Rapid fire time now. Fight that you got to target in DFS really quickly. That's not the Diaz and Ferguson fight. Fight that you got to target that whoever wins has a really good chance of putting up 100 plus points.
Yeah, it's going to be the first fight of the night with Weeks and Lioness.
For sure. Agree there. Prize Picks, you see the promo code there on screen. You can actually parlay props over at Prize Picks if you didn't know that. They have some really soft lines. Use promo code OCCUPY to get a 100% deposit match bonus up to $100. Go check it out. Jake puts his favorite Prize Picks on his site, MMADFS.com, as well in the daily plug at OccupyFantasy.com. Jake, any line that's still available stick out to you right now?
Yeah, I really like the Kudalaba over 95.5 points. I think he's either going to get a round one knockout or a super wrestling heavy decision, and both of those are going to score over 95.5.
Very fair. Okay, we'll close it out with our stream parlay of the week. And what we do is we put our best bets together. I pick one, Jake picks one, we parlay it together. Jake has all of his favorite bets over at MMADFS.com. Puts them out early in the week too, assuming the fights don't change on Friday out of nowhere. And you want to take advantage of that. And then any bets that are still available that you want to bet are in the daily plug, OccupyFantasy.com. Links are in the description below. Make sure you go check those out. Jake, we get Chimaev against Holland, who is both on tape and on paper and self-proclaimed not a wrestler. And we can get Chimaev sub round 1 or round 2 at +4 something over at FanDuel, right? So I don't know how you don't take that. So give me a Chimaev by sub in round 1 or round 2 from my side of the stream parlay.
Yeah, I really like that one, man. That was the first bet I added this morning when props came on. It seems crazy. With Chimaev, what's his money line? -550, and all of his finishes come in the first 2 rounds. So, yeah, kind of nutty. Holland's never been knocked out, so I think the sub is the way it's going to come. +440 is great. That was actually probably my favorite bet on the slate, so I'm going to have to take a step down. I'm going to go with Kudalaba by decision at +550, which seems sort of gross, but at the same time, you look at all of his fights, and basically they're all either round 1 wins or decision. So at +550 as the big favorite, I like the value on that one. And if we combine those together, we can get +34.10. So a little bit of 34-1 action. That's not bad.
Yeah, and you've been hot on the plug parlays recently. Again, in the daily plug, a couple 20 to 1 or longer shots. And we got another one in the plug today, so make sure you go check that out as well. All right, that'll do it. A lot to talk about. We finished though in 29 minutes. Well done, Jake. So MMADFS.com. Go read the sheet. All of Jake's breakdowns for the fights. The archive. Really important. Still got 90 minutes left before lock. Go check it out. The salary usage in the archive will be very valuable for this slate in particular. OccupyFantasy.com. The plug is up. Top plays. Lineup construction tips. Very important for today. Best bets. Prize picks plays. The Occupy model's up. Ranking every fighter, FanDuel, DraftKings with projected ownership. Very key for today. I can say this every week. It continues to be truer and truer. More and more people are trying to figure out how the hell the Occupy model is doing this. More and more people are signing up. You don't want to miss it. And the lineup builder is updated. Built up to 300 lineups. Bunch of rules. You'll need the rules today. The builder's done a great job implementing those rules today. I feel like you're behind the 8 ball if you're not using it for UFC DFS contest. Jake, final sentence, final word about this slate.
Please don't be Ferguson, Chimaev, D-Rod in the winning lineup.
I will echo those sentiments. Follow Jake on Twitter at DFS_MMA. Follow me at Brian Jester FF. Follow us at Occupy Fantasy. We appreciate everyone taking the time out of their day this Saturday afternoon to watch us and listen to us break down the slate. We appreciate you. Good luck in tonight's UFC 279 card.